The first sign that something was wrong came on a quiet Sunday morning. I was lying on my bed scrolling through my phone when my mom called. I could tell from the first word she spoke that something wasn't right. "Mia, something terrible has happened." My body tensed immediately. My mom wasn't the type to panic easily. She was strong, one of the strongest women I knew. After my dad passed away when I was 15, she had worked tirelessly to keep us afloat. She juggled 2 jobs at one point, taking overtime whenever she could, just to make sure I never went without. So hearing the distress in her voice sent a wave of anxiety through me. "What's wrong?" I asked, sitting up in bed. "It's my bank account." Her voice was shaky, almost disbelieving. "My savings. It's all gone." I froze. "Gone? What do you mean gone?" "I logged in this morning to check my balance and the money isn't there. I had almost $50,000 saved, Mia. Every cent I put away for years. It's just gone." A chill ran down my spine. My mom was careful with her finances. She never made risky investments, never spent on unnecessary luxuries. She was the kind of person who triple-checked her accounts every month and saved every receipt. There was no way she had just lost that money. "Did you check with the bank?" I asked, already reaching for my laptop. "Yes, I called them right away. They said the transactions were all made from my account, which means someone had my login information." My stomach twisted. "Did you ask Brian?" I asked, my voice dropping slightly. There was silence on the other end of the line. A long, hesitant silence. I could picture her standing in the kitchen, biting her lip, struggling to come to terms with the possibility that the man she had married, the man she had trusted, could do something like this. "Me. Don't start." Her voice was quiet, tired. "Brian wouldn't do that." I almost laughed. Of course she didn't want to believe it. "Mom, come on. You know he has access to your passwords. You trust him too much. And he has never given me a reason not to," she insisted, but there was doubt creeping into her tone. "Okay," I said, trying to stay calm. "What did he say when you told him?" "He said he had nothing to do with it," she said, but there was something about the way she said it. Like she wanted to believe him, but deep down she wasn't sure. I clenched my jaw. That was classic Brian. Always lying with just enough confidence to make people question their own instincts. He had been doing it since the day he walked into our lives. Brian was a con man in every sense of the word. He had met my mom 2 years ago, swept her off her feet with his charm, and within months he had moved in. He always had excuses for why he couldn't find stable work. Always had a big opportunity on the horizon that never seemed to come. My mom, ever the hopeful, believed in him. She thought he just needed time. I knew better. I had never trusted him. "Listen, Mom," I said, taking a deep breath. "Let me look into this. Just, let me check a few things. If Brian is innocent, great. But if he's lying, I need you to be prepared for the truth." She sighed heavily. "Mia, I don't want you to go looking for trouble. Trouble already found us, Mom. Someone stole your money. We need to find out who." She didn't argue anymore. That was all the permission I needed. I opened my laptop, my fingers flying over the keyboard as I pulled up a few programs. If Brian thought he could take my mother's money and get away with it, he had another thing coming. I was about to show him that he wasn't the only one who could play dirty. Brian thought he was smart. He thought he could lie his way out of anything, flash his charming smile, and make my mother believe whatever nonsense he spewed. But he wasn't dealing with my mother anymore. He was dealing with me. And I was smarter. I sat at my desk, my laptop open, fingers flying over the keyboard as I pulled up my mom's bank statements. The first thing I noticed was that the money hadn't been taken all at once. It had been transferred in small amounts over the past 6 months, tiny enough that she wouldn't immediately notice. Clever. But not clever enough. The transactions led to an account under a name I didn't recognize. At first glance it looked random, but something about it felt off. I copied the account details and started digging. Most people didn't realize how much information was available online if you knew where to look. I ran the name through several databases and within minutes I had my answer. The account belonged to no one. It was fake. A ghost account. Something a scammer or a fraudster would use to launder money. And there was only one person I knew who had the motive to do something like this. Brian. I took a deep breath and went further. I traced the IP addresses of the devices used to access my mom's bank account. There were a few different ones. Some from her phone, some from her work computer. But there was one that stood out. An address that came from inside our house. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was fact. Brian had stolen my mom's money and he had done it from right under her nose. I clenched my fist. The arrogance. The audacity. This man had been eating my mother's food, sleeping in her bed, pretending to love her, all while draining her life savings. And he thought he was going to get away with it. Well, not on my watch. I knew that confronting Brian without proof wouldn't work. He was a professional liar. He would twist the truth, act offended, and gaslight my mom until she questioned her own sanity. So I needed to be strategic. I took screenshots of the transactions, the fake account, and the IP address linking the theft to our house. Then I did something that I knew would push him into making a mistake. I set a trap. I installed a keylogger on his laptop. A tiny piece of software that would record every keystroke he made. If he logged into his real bank account or even typed an email about the stolen money, I would see it. Then I waited. That evening I sat at the dinner table watching Brian closely. He looked relaxed, cutting into his steak like he didn't have a care in the world. My mom, on the other hand, looked exhausted. I could see the stress in her eyes, the weight of the missing money pressing on her. "You're quiet today, Mom," I said, deliberately setting the bait. She sighed. "I just can't stop thinking about the money. The bank still has no answers. I just don't understand how this happened." Brian barely reacted. He swallowed a bite of food and gave her his usual fake sympathetic look. "Babe, I told you these things happen. Banks make mistakes. Maybe it was a hacker." I almost laughed. A hacker? Oh, the irony. A hacker that only took money from your account and nowhere else? I said, raising an eyebrow. "That's pretty specific, don't you think?" He gave me a sharp look. "What are you trying to say, Mia?" I shrugged, playing innocent. "Nothing. Just seems weird, that's all. I mean, unless someone had access to Mom's passwords. Someone in the house, maybe." I watched his grip on his fork tighten ever so slightly. "Got him." "Mia, stop it," my mom said, rubbing her temples. "I don't need you making me more anxious." "I'm just saying," I continued, my eyes still locked on Brian. "If it were me, I'd start by looking at the people closest to me." Brian let out a forced laugh. "Well, lucky for us, I have nothing to hide." Liar. But that's exactly what I wanted him to say. Because now I knew he was sweating. And soon I was going to prove it. Brian thought he had everyone fooled. He thought my mother was too trusting, too blind to ever suspect him. And he thought I was just a naive girl who didn't know how the real world worked. But he underestimated me. That was his first mistake. His second mistake? Stealing from the wrong person. After dinner, I went back to my room and opened my laptop. The keylogger I had installed on Brian's computer was already working. Every keystroke, every password, every email, everything he typed I could see. And within just a few hours I found exactly what I was looking for. A login attempt to an offshore bank account. I clicked on the recorded keystrokes and saw the username and partial password he had typed. He hadn't even been careful, just typed it out like he had nothing to hide. I quickly copied the details and started working on breaking into the account. Now, I wasn't a hacker in the Hollywood sense. I didn't type a few lines of code and instantly gain access. But I did know my way around cybersecurity loopholes. And Brian? He was lazy. He used the same passwords across multiple sites. It only took me an hour to figure out the rest of the password through old email leaks and pattern recognition. When I finally gained access to his bank account, my heart pounded in my chest. There was $50,000. My mother's money sitting in his account like it belonged to him. My hands clenched into fists. He had done this to her. He had smiled in her face, pretended to love her, all while stealing from her bit by bit, thinking she would never notice. But now I had him. And I wasn't just going to take the money back. I was going to make sure he suffered for what he did. Stealing the money back was easy. I simply transferred it from his account right back to my mom's, making sure to leave a digital trail that proved where it had come from. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted Brian to know he had lost. So I left him a message. In the memo section of the transaction I wrote, "You thought you were smart, but I was smarter. Every penny you took, I found a way to return it. Checkmate." I smiled to myself as I hit confirm. But I wasn't done yet. I wanted my mother to see him for what he truly was. So I took it a step further. Using the keylogger, I accessed Brian's emails. And what I found made my stomach turn. He had been planning to leave my mother. Once the money was completely gone, he was going to disappear. Worse, he had been talking to another woman, someone he had promised a new life with the money he stole. I copied everything. Screenshots, email chains, even the reservations he had booked for himself and his new girlfriend. Then I compiled it all into one neat little folder and scheduled an email. To my mother. With the subject line, "The Truth About Brian." I set it to send automatically the next morning. And then I sat back and waited for the fireworks. The next morning felt different. There was an eerie calm in the air, like the universe was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. I sat at the breakfast table stirring my coffee, pretending everything was normal. My mother was in the kitchen, pouring herself a cup of tea, oblivious to the digital bomb I had just set off. Brian, as usual, sat at the head of the table, scrolling through his phone with that smug look on his face. Not for long. At exactly 8 a.m., my mother's phone dinged with an email notification. I watched as she picked it up, took a sip of her tea and clicked on the message. For a few seconds she read in silence, her face neutral. Then her hand trembled. Her grip on the phone tightened. The color drained from her face. Then she gasped. "Oh my God." Brian's head snapped up. "What's wrong, babe?" he asked, feigning concern. My mother didn't answer. Her eyes flicked between her phone and him, widening with every passing second. "No," she whispered. "No, this can't be real." Brian set his phone down and stood up. "What's going on? Talk to me." My mother finally looked up. "You lying, thieving." She couldn't even finish the sentence. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. "Mom," I said, playing dumb. "What happened?" She turned the screen toward me, showing me the evidence I had carefully compiled. Brian's offshore account. The stolen money. The messages to another woman. His plan to leave her once the money was drained. My mother was shaking with rage. My mother was shaking with rage. "You stole from me?" she asked, her voice cracking. "You were planning to leave me?" Brian went pale. His jaw tightened and I could see his mind racing, trying to come up with an excuse. "Babe, this is a mistake. Someone hacked me," he blurted out. I almost laughed. "Hacked you?" my mother echoed, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Then explain why the money suddenly reappeared in my account. With a message exposing you?" She slammed her phone onto the table, making both our cups rattle. Brian's face twisted in shock. He snatched his own phone, quickly opening his banking app. When he saw the missing money and the message I had left behind, his eyes went wild. "Who?" He stopped mid-sentence, his gaze slowly turning toward me. And that's when it hit him. "You." I smiled. "Morning, Brian." His nostrils flared, his hands curled into fists, but he was too stunned to react properly. He looked from me to my mother, realizing for the first time that his entire game was over. "You little..." "Careful," I cut in smoothly. "You wouldn't want to threaten me right now. Not with everything I have on you." I leaned forward, lowering my voice just enough so that only he could hear. "You thought you were smart, Brian. But I was smarter. Every penny you took, I found a way to return it. No. Now, my mom sees exactly what kind of man you are." His face turned red, veins popping in his neck. He looked ready to explode, but before he could say another word, my mother stepped in. "Pack your things," she said coldly. Brian's head whipped around. "What?" "You heard me." My mother's voice was like steel. "Get out of my house. Right now. Baby, we can talk about this. Don't listen to Mia, she..." "I said get out," she screamed, slamming her hand on the table. The room went dead silent. For the first time since he walked into our lives, Brian looked genuinely afraid. He had lost. And I had won. But I wasn't done yet. As Brian packed his things, still grumbling under his breath, I made one last move. I pulled out my phone, opened the email app and forwarded everything to his other woman. Subject: "Just in case he lies to you too." Then I hit send. And with that, Brian's entire world came crashing down. Brian stood in the doorway, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, his face twisted in a mix of anger and disbelief. "You're making a mistake," he spat at my mother. "I loved you, Diane. You're throwing away everything we built over some stupid misunderstanding." My mother didn't flinch. She stood tall, arms crossed over her chest, the evidence of his betrayal still open on her phone. "A misunderstanding?" she repeated bitterly. "You stole from me, Brian. You lied to me. You were planning to leave me once you drained my money. That's not a misunderstanding, that's a con. Brian turned to me then, his expression darkening. You did this. I smiled. Took you long enough to figure that out. His hands clenched into fists. You think you're smart, don't you? No, I know I'm smart. Smarter than you at least. I took a step forward. Every single dollar you took, I got it back. And I made sure Mom knew exactly who you were. Brian's nostrils flared, but he was stuck. He couldn't deny it. The proof was all there, staring him in the face. You're going to regret this, he said through gritted teeth. I let out a small laugh. Oh, I doubt that. Before he could say anything else, my mother pointed toward the door. Get out. Brian hesitated as if he wanted to say more, but he must have realized he had no ground left to stand on. With one last glare in my direction, he turned and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was thick. My mother let out a shaky breath and sank onto the couch, her hands covering her face. I sat down next to her, gently placing my hand on her shoulder. Are you okay? I asked softly. She nodded but didn't speak right away. I could tell she was processing everything. The betrayal. The lies. The humiliation. I was so blind, she whispered after a long pause. I should have seen it. I should have known. No, Mom, I said firmly. Brian was a manipulator. He knew exactly how to deceive you. That's not your fault. She sighed, rubbing her temples. How did you figure it out? I hesitated for a moment, then decided there was no point in hiding it. I noticed money disappearing from your account and I knew you wouldn't be careless with it. So I started watching him. I installed a keylogger on his laptop, got access to his emails and found his offshore account. Her eyes widened. Mia, I don't even know what to say. That's illegal. I shrugged. So is stealing from your wife. She blinked then, surprisingly laughed. It was small, almost disbelieving, but it was there. You're unbelievable, she said, shaking her head. You raised me to be resourceful, I said with a grin. She exhaled deeply, looking down at her hands. Thank you, Mia. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't caught him. You don't have to worry about that, I said, leaning back. Brian's out of our lives now. And I made sure he won't come crawling back. My mother gave me a curious look. What do you mean? I smirked. Let's just say, I sent all the evidence to the woman he was planning to run away with. Something tells me she won't be too happy with him. My mother's eyes widened and then to my surprise she burst out laughing. You really don't hold back, do you? She said, wiping a tear from the corner of her eye. Not when it comes to protecting you. She reached over and pulled me into a tight hug. I love you, Mia. More than anything. I love you too, Mom. At that moment I knew everything was going to be okay. Brian was just a bad chapter in her life. A chapter that was now officially closed. 6 months had passed since we kicked Brian out of our lives. In that time my mother had transformed into a completely different person. The woman who once second-guessed herself, who had been manipulated and deceived, was now stronger, more confident, and more in control than I had ever seen her. She had moved into a new apartment. A fresh start, free from any reminders of Brian. She redecorated the place entirely, filling it with warm colors and small personal touches that made it truly hers. One afternoon, as I helped her hang up a new painting in the living room, she turned to me with a thoughtful look. I've been thinking about going back to school, she said casually. I nearly dropped the painting. Wait, what? She chuckled at my reaction. I never finished my business degree, remember? I gave it up when I had you and then got caught up in life. But now, I think I want to finish what I started. A slow smile spread across my face. Mom, that's amazing. You think so? She asked, a bit hesitant. I know so. You deserve this. You spent so much of your life taking care of me and making sacrifices. Now it's your turn to do something for yourself. She nodded, a spark of excitement in her eyes. It feels good, Mia. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm in control of my own life again. I hugged her tightly. That's because you are. As for Brian, he faded into the background like a bad dream. After our last phone call, he must have realized he had no leverage left because he never tried to contact my mom again. But I wasn't done with him just yet. Before completely closing the chapter, I did one final thing. I sent an anonymous tip to the IRS about his offshore account. A month later, I heard through a friend that Brian had gotten into serious trouble for tax fraud. Apparently, his so-called savings had been flagged, and now he was under investigation. I didn't need to know the details. It was enough for me to know that karma had finally caught up with him. I never told my mom what I did. She had already moved on and I didn't want to drag her back into the mess. But deep down I knew she would have approved. One evening as we sat on her balcony drinking tea, she looked over at me and smiled. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Mia." I grinned. "I know." She laughed, shaking her head. "Seriously though, you saved me. I don't know what I would have done without you." I took a sip of my tea and leaned back. "You don't ever have to find out." And just like that, I knew the nightmare was truly over. Brian thought he was smart, but I was smarter. And in the end, my mom and I had won.